los participantes tuvieron la oportunidad de manifestar sus acuerdos y sus desacuerdos con las propuestas que estamos incluyendo dentro de la política. Todo el material que se recogió en las mesas de trabajo, ténganlo por seguro que van a ser tomados en cuenta y la mayor parte va a ser incorporado en el documento. Les recuerdo que el documento completo lo pueden descargar en la página del Ministerio, que es mjp.go.cr, y el día de hoy se les entregó un resumen ejecutivo en el cual están los principales puntos, específicamente los lineamientos, que es el material con el que estamos trabajando en las mesas de trabajo. Les recuerdo nada más, las mesas de trabajo abordan el tema de trabajo, educación, inclusión cultural, inserción social y atención a poblaciones vulnerables, que es uno de los puntos que Sara tocará el día de hoy en su presentación, que corresponden al eje de desarrollo humano. Hay un eje de infraestructura inmobiliario y condiciones ambientales, en las cuales se aborda el estado de la infraestructura y el impacto ambiental que tienen las actividades del sistema penitenciario. Y existe un eje de prevención de la violencia y promoción de la paz, en el cual se prevé abordar el tema de violencia y prevención del riesgo dentro de los centros penitenciarios y en el entorno, siempre considerando que las personas privadas de libertad son personas privadas de libertad por un periodo transitorio y después formarán parte de las comunidades igual que el resto de las personas. Nada más quería hacer este encuadre. Le cedo la palabra al señor Luis Mariano Barrantes, el director general de adaptación social, para que haga una breve reflexión sobre esto antes de pasar a la presentación de Sara. Muchas gracias.
Buenos días a todos y todas. Señorita Sara Sullivan, bienvenida. Un gusto poder participar hoy en esta actividad. Les damos la bienvenida y también esperando sus aportes en los diferentes mesas de trabajo para darle continuidad al Congreso sobre política penitenciaria, y estamos seguros que con sus aportes se va a nutrir la propuesta que en definitiva se vaya a emitir en torno a este proceso. Nos corresponde hacer algunas manifestaciones generales respecto a la política penitenciaria, específicamente en lo que son algunas reflexiones y datos generales sobre la política penitenciaria en Costa Rica. Es importante mencionar que en los últimos años el sistema penitenciario en materia de política penitenciaria ha tenido muy poco avance, y esto se debe a la convergencia de diversos factores, entre los cuales podríamos mencionar algunos de ellos. Específicamente podemos citar que tal vez una ausencia de un acorde de gestión, aquí sin personalizar evidentemente lo que concierne a esta acción, porque me parece que tiene que ver con un tema de carácter institucional y no de una instancia en específico. Limitado presupuesto, también con que la administración penitenciaria ha enfrentado su quehacer, ha sido un factor fundamental para efectos de que no se pudiese hacer una gestión encaminada a la política penitenciaria en Costa Rica. Para muchas de las administraciones que anteceden a la actual, la infraestructura no fue una prioridad, a pesar de que es evidente la necesidad de contar con espacios adecuados para el alojamiento de la población privada de libertad según sus características. No hubo un interés por evaluar y no surgieron nuevas iniciativas impulsoras de cambio. podemos afirmar que la actual administración ha sentado las bases para la ejecución de una nueva política penitenciaria, al promover de manera inédita la constitución de nuevas formas de atención tendientes a varios aspectos, lo que es el desarrollo humano, la inserción sociolaboral, fortalecer el respeto de los derechos fundamentales de las personas privadas de libertad, porque, bueno, hay que rescatar que siempre ha sido uno de los propósitos fundamentales de la administración penitenciaria, el respeto de los derechos fundamentales de las personas sometidas a privación de libertad. Ahora se están impulsando otras acciones que precisamente contribuyen a su fortalecimiento. La atención postpenitenciaria, que está en proceso mediante la creación de la unidad de inserción social, como una acción que con anterioridad no se había asumido por parte de la institución. Se rescata el abordaje dirigido a la nueva institucionalización a través de la creación de la oficina para la atención o la valoración de personas no institucionalizadas, de conformidad con el artículo 24 del reglamento técnico del sistema penitenciario, lo que ha contribuido, como ahora más adelante vamos a observar, a disminuir la cantidad de personas que ingresan al sistema penitenciario. Se ha promovido impulsar la generación de actividades extramuros de diferente naturaleza, a nivel artístico, a nivel educativo, también a nivel musical, literario. No significa de que con anterioridad no hubiésemos podido desarrollar actividades de esta naturaleza. Se han intensificado con el concurso del personal de seguridad, el que ha hecho un gran esfuerzo, ha prestado una gran colaboración para que estos eventos puedan ejecutarse en la comunidad, tomando en cuenta que la persona privada de libertad, en el momento en que cumpla su sentencia condenatoria o bien cuando la autoridad judicial, tratándose de alguna persona indiciada que pueda optar por estas posibilidades, egresen de prisión, pues tiene que insertarse al medio comunal, y es importante que vaya paulatinamente insertándose al mismo. En concordancia con lo que acabo de mencionar, bueno, pues se han creado las unidades de atención integral, el equipo de valoración para personas no institucionalizadas, el equipo de seguimiento y monitoreo de personas con arresto domiciliario a las que se les aplica el dispositivo electrónico. Y el programa de atención a la mujer también ha sido fundamental en este proceso. Uno de los principales problemas y como ayer se citó por parte de los expositores, que enfrenta la institución penitenciaria, y Costa Rica no es la excepción, es el problema del hacinamiento. Y comentábamos que del hacinamiento se derivan algunas situaciones que repercuten evidentemente en la integridad física, en la estabilidad emocional de las personas privadas de libertad, como lo es la afectación de derechos, la violencia intracarcelaria, la pérdida de control en el sistema, en cada uno de los centros penitenciarios, y el trasiego de drogas, entre otros, siendo fundamental establecer acciones, llevar a cabo acciones que permitan precisamente disminuir el hacinamiento y con ello poder controlar cada una de estas situaciones que se derivan de esta problemática. Algunas de las acciones que se han emprendido para atender el problema de la sobrepoblación y el hacinamiento carcelario van a ser enfocadas luego de esta pequeña exposición que vamos a hacer a través de esta lámina. En la actualidad tenemos una capacidad real en el sistema penitenciario en lo que se refiere a la modalidad de atención institucional de 10.551 espacios físicos. La población actual al día de ayer es de 14.035 personas privadas de libertad, con una sobrepoblación de 3.484 y un hacinamiento crítico del 33%. De conformidad con la estructura avalada por Mideplan y de acuerdo con cada una de las modalidades y unidades que se fueron creando, tenemos la siguiente información. En la unidad de seguimiento de personas con dispositivo electrónico, actualmente contamos con 492 usuarios. En la unidad de valoración para personas no institucionalizadas se han promovido una importante cantidad de personas para que no ingresan a la modalidad de atención institucional, de los cuales se recomendaron 223 que fueron avalados por el Instituto Nacional de Criminología. En cuanto a las unidades de atención integral, tenemos al día de ayer 468 personas para un total de 1.183 personas privadas de libertad que no hacen ingreso a centros de la modalidad de atención institucional, lo que contribuye en alguna medida a no aumentar la problemática derivada de la sobrepoblación y el hacinamiento carcelario. Son 1.183 personas menos que tenemos en la modalidad de atención institucional. También se creó la unidad de inserción social, que está en desarrollo, ya sea por parte del equipo que la compone, se han llevado a cabo encuentros con varios de los centros penitenciarios que fueron seleccionados para llevar a cabo un pilotaje, a efecto de ir también concientizando, sensibilizando al personal técnico de cada uno de los centros de atención institucional para el desarrollo de lo que es la fase de egreso con perspectiva de generar una efectiva inserción social de las personas una vez que egresan y con el aporte de otras organizaciones gubernamentales y no gubernamentales que permitan una efectiva estabilidad de la persona cuando se inserte a la sociedad. La unidad de género y la unidad, el programa de atención a la mujer, también son otros de las acciones emprendidas. Como mencionábamos, la capacidad real en el sistema penitenciario en el año 2015 era de 9.130 espacios. Al 2017 se han habilitado 1.400 nuevos espacios y la capacidad real aumentó a 10.151 espacios físicos. La diferencia que se genera entre la capacidad real del 2015 al 2017 está en función de la creación de las unidades de atención integral, Reinaldo Villalobos para 704 espacios y Pablo Presberi en Pérez Celedón para 256, lo que suma un total de 900 nuevos espacios. La remodelación de los ámbitos A y B del módulo D del centro Jorge Arturo Montero Castro para un total de 208 espacios nuevos, y esto también implicó un ajuste en la capacidad real del centro Rodríguez Echeverría por parte del juez de ejecución de la pena de Alajuela, quien estableció en 958 la capacidad real, luego de que la misma estuviese definida en 550 aproximadamente. A eso hay que restarle 108 espacios que por error se estaban asignando como parte de la capacidad real del Centro de Atención Institucional de San José. Se tiene una proyección de nuevos espacios para el año 2018, posiblemente en el transcurso del primer trimestre, de 1.144 nuevos espacios físicos, divididos de la siguiente forma: los arcos modulares, que tienen un grado de avance superior al 50% y con el aval de la Contraloría General de la República para reanudar los trabajos respectivos, que tendrá 4 arcos modulares con capacidad cada uno para 100 personas. La remodelación del módulo C del ámbito D, cuyos trabajos están por iniciar en el centro Jorge Arturo Montero Castro, nos va a dar una capacidad para 104 personas más. Y la unidad de atención integral 20 de diciembre en el cantón de Pocosí para 640 nuevos espacios. En este cuadro podemos apreciar la cantidad de personas privadas de libertad promovidas para cambio en la modalidad de custodia con el aval del Instituto Nacional de Criminología en los últimos 10 años, en un total de 15.666 personas. En lo que respecta al 2017, al 30 de septiembre, el Instituto Nacional de Criminología conoció y avaló un total de 1.429 casos para ubicar en la modalidad de atención semi-institucional. En lo que respecta a la unidad de repatriación, que recientemente constituida, creo que no lo enfocábamos anteriormente, se tiene que fueron repatriados en el año 2015 19 personas, en el 2016 13 y en el 2017 25. En cuanto a transferidos, en el 2015 19, en el 2016 26 y 14 en el 2017. Aquí es importante mencionar que dentro de la estructura organizacional avalada por Mideplan, se constituyó la unidad de repatriación. Anteriormente estaba a cargo de un solo funcionario, que era el que hacía todas estas tareas, y ahora la unidad está compuesta por 4 funcionarios. En lo que respecta a la unidad de valoración o el equipo técnico de valoración para personas no institucionalizadas, podemos observar cómo fueron abordados un total de 319 casos, de los cuales 223 fueron recomendados para cambio en la modalidad de custodia y así fueron homologados por el Instituto Nacional de Criminología. 54 casos resultaron negativos y se encuentran pendientes de resolución 42, para un total de 319. ¿Cuáles serían los principales retos de la institución? Podríamos enfocarlos como disminuir la sobrepoblación y el hacinamiento carcelario, continuar con el rescate del prestigio del sistema penitenciario costarricense en América Latina, verdad que estuvo bastante disminuido, bastante estancado durante mucho tiempo, y creo que esta administración le ha venido a dar un impulso que tiene que ser sostenible, y quienes asuman la nueva administración dan de darle continuidad a los programas y proyectos que se han impulsado. Generar una mayor inserción penal de la población penal en procesos educativos, de capacitación y laborales, revirtiendo el tiempo de ocio por mayor ocupación. Eso vamos a plantear acá un poco lo que la señora ministra de Justicia y Paz ha estado promoviendo en términos de replicar el modelo de atención de las unidades de atención institucional en los centros de atención institucional, en términos de que se procure una mayor ocupación de la población alojada en cada uno de los mismos. Bien sabemos de que aproximadamente entre el 60 y el 65% de las personas que se encuentran ubicadas en la modalidad de atención institucional se ocupan de alguna actividad, bien sea educativa, de capacitación o laboral. Lo que se persigue y debiera tenerse como un reto realmente es que la mayor parte de la población privada de libertad esté ocupada en alguna de estas actividades. Rescatar la clasificación de la población penal, que en gran medida se ha ido perdiendo, y no porque las autoridades de la administración penitenciaria así lo determinen, sino que el hacinamiento es la principal causa de la sobrepoblación también de este tipo de situaciones. Retomar el proceso de inducción al personal que se incorpora en el sistema penitenciario. Eso lo hemos venido junto con don Alexander y don Luis Bernardo Arguedas mencionando. También es una actividad que se ha ido perdiendo. Consideramos fundamental, así se lo hemos comentado y lo comparte don Alejandro Redondo, que la Escuela de Capacitación Penitenciaria se encargue de lo que es este proceso de inducción de las personas que ingresan al sistema penitenciario a laborar. Evidentemente es importante en este contexto rescatar la necesidad de que las personas que ingresan a la institución penitenciaria no solamente pasen por un proceso de inducción, sino que se tome en consideración en el marco de la posibilidad de que puedan llevar a cabo pasantías, no en una sola modalidad de atención, sino en diferentes, para que tengan una noción más amplia del funcionamiento del sistema penitenciario. Y también hacer efectiva la política penitenciaria que se impulsa a través de este proyecto, de esta propuesta que va a surgir luego de concluido este Congreso. El día domingo 10 de diciembre era el Día de los Derechos Humanos, importante rescatarlo para también tenerlo presente. Como dice don Nelson Mandela, la grandeza de la vida no consiste en no caer nunca, sino en levantarnos cada vez que caemos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a don Mariano por sus palabras. Seguidamente vamos a tener la primera ponencia de este día de exposición con Sara Sullivan. Ella es directora de proyectos del Vera Institute of Justice Dirige la iniciativa Alternativas Seguras a la Segregación, que se asocia con funcionarios penitenciarios estatales. También maneja un consejo asesor de segregación nacional y un centro de recursos en línea. Además de supervisar los esfuerzos nacionales del Vera Institute, Sara trabajó en el Departamento de Corrección de la Ciudad de Nueva York y del Departamento de Correcciones de Pensilvania. Anteriormente proporcionó asistencia técnica a los estados involucrados en la iniciativa de reinversión de la justicia, incluidos Luisiana y Oregon, ayudándoles a implementar nuevas políticas de condena y prácticas basadas en la evidencia en los sistemas de libertad condicional y prisión. También brindó asistencia al Comité Asesor de Justicia Juvenil de la Ciudad de Nueva York. Le damos la bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso.
Buenos días. That's about the extent of my Spanish ability. So I want to thank everyone so much for having me here. This is actually my first time in Costa Rica, and it's been lovely. I had the opportunity to come out early on Friday and go down to Manuel Antonio and really saw how beautiful your country was. So I'm grateful for the opportunity not only to be in Costa Rica, but also to be here for this very important, critical time in reforming your justice system. The presentation, I want to thank Alvaro for translating the slides into Spanish. I will be speaking obviously in English and want to thank the interpreter for making the interpretation for me, so thank you. Lastly, before I dive in, I just wanted to say how impressed I am with the plan that has been developed so far. It truly is an impressive document and a very progressive way at looking at the justice system, which is wonderful to see. So what I have been asked to present on today and what my presentation will cover is alternatives to incarceration, particularly given your overcrowding challenges you're having right now, as well as areas of conditions of confinement and reentry. So in the presentation, I'll give a little introduction. I'll give the United States context. A lot of what I'll be talking about is examples from the United States. I'll also be peppering in some examples from European countries. I had the opportunity to visit the prison system in Germany and the Netherlands, and so I'll be using some examples from those systems as well. I'll also talk about the change process, as well as key decision points and strategies to reduce incarceration at each decision point. Again, conditions of confinement and reentry, and with a conclusion, and we'll see if we have time for questions at the end. You will hear common themes discussed in my presentation that were also talked about in the presentations yesterday and in the document, the proposal that is being proposed. And lastly, if any terminology I'm using does not translate, please feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, and ask me to explain if there's a term I'm using that does not translate here. So a little introduction and a little bit about the organization I work for, the Vera Institute of Justice. So at Vera, we envision a society that respects the dignity of every person and safeguards justice for everyone. Our mission is to drive change by urgently building and improving justice systems that ensure fairness, promote safety, and lastly, strengthen communities. We are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Everything we do is rooted in research and data-driven decision-making. We study and analyze problems in the justice system. We provide evidence to drive effective policies and practices. We pilot solutions, and we engage diverse communities. A few of our priorities that I wanted to highlight. One is closing mass incarceration's front door, also improving safety, trust, and justice in a diverse America, and significantly improving conditions of confinement. The way we do this, everything we do is in partnership with state and local government agencies. So agencies invite our organization in to help them identify strategies to solve the problems that they're trying to address. So a little bit about the United States context. So yesterday, Senor Cavallaro showed incarceration rates in the Americas, leaving out the United States, and for good reason. So I'm going to add that United States of America context and give a quick history of incarceration trends in the United States and recent focus on reducing prison populations. This will give some background and context to some of the strategies that I will be presenting later and why the United States has taken this on. So the United States of America is the largest driver of prison populations in the world. You'll see the slide over to the left. What this shows is the United States makes up 5% of the world's population. And the graph on the right shows that we hold 25% of the world's prisoners. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. We hover a little around 713 per 100,000 residents are incarcerated. To give you a comparison, in European countries, they range from in the low 60s up into around 120 people incarcerated per 100,000. So how did we get here? It's important to know, both in the United States as well as in Costa Rica, where you came from, how you got to the situation that we're in order to identify how to reduce that use. So this slide shows an example of trends of incarceration in the United States, starting to the left over in 1920, all the way through, I believe this goes to 2014. So as you'll see, starting in the 80s, up until the 80s, we had a very low number of people in prison and jails. Just for context, for us, jails, very simply, is where we house people pre-trial, and prison is where we house people who have been sentenced. So you'll see in the 1980s, and I'll get into the reasons why, there was a dramatic increase, as you can see, in the use of incarceration. That increase continued until about 2008, and then we started seeing a reduction, and I'll talk about some of the strategies we utilize in order to achieve that reduction. So what led to this increase? Very simply, we instituted mandatory prison sentences, increased use of prison time for low-level offenses, and an intensified enforcement on drug laws. There are lots of other factors that played a role, but these are the main three factors. So one of the things we learned is, the question is, what did we get for this incarceration? The changes in sentencing that we implemented reflected a consensus that viewed incarceration as a key instrument for control. Yet over the 4 decades, when incarceration rates steadily rose, U.S. crime rates showed no real trend. So if you look on the slide over here, the brown line is our incarceration rate, and the orange line is our violent crime rate. So what you see is that as the incarceration rate steadily increased, the violent crime rate had no real trend. You'll see violent crime increased until about 1980, took a little dip in 1985, increased again until the mid-90s, and then has been on a slow decline ever since. So there's not a direct correlation with the more you use prisons, the more you incarcerate, the lower the violent crime is. There's no real trend in violent crime. Research has shown a very weak relationship between higher incarceration rates and lower crime rates. Some studies differ a little, but most of the literature shows that between 1980 and 2000, for each 10% increase in incarceration rates was associated with just a 2 to 4% lower crime rate. And the majority of the reduction in crime rate was in property crime. The impact on violent crime rate has been almost nothing. What this slide shows is that it's hard to see, so I'll explain it. So each line is a state in the United States. The red line is the crime rate, and the gray lines is the incarceration rate. And if you look at the scale on the bottom, you'll see 0%. This shows the change. So the change in incarceration rate and the change in crime rate. So what you'll see is a number of states, you'll look at about the top half of this graph, was able to achieve a reduction in incarceration rates while at the same time reducing crime rates. And then then there are some states where that did not take into play. But what this shows is about half of the states in the United States of America have been able to effectively reduce incarceration rates and reduce crime rates at the same time. So why this shifting national landscape? As I mentioned, in 2008, there was starting to be a reduction in crime rates. We were realizing that we were creating this explosive prison system, and the desire to reduce that fell into 4 categories: the increased cost, and the more we invested in our criminal justice system, the less we were investing in other systems such as education, mental health, public health. Public safety, as I showed, we were investing all of this money into our prison and jail systems without any real return on an increase in public safety. The impact on families and communities have been significant. And there was also a focus wanting to be played onto equity and fairness, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So talking a little bit about the change process. So the process that is taken on is just as important to what are the changes that you're going to make. So in the US, and this is shown through research to be the effective way to change processes. This is an example from a national initiative in the United States called the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. But I want to highlight here a number of the steps are very reflective of what research shows is an effective process for changing a system. I want to start with what's in the middle, which is engaging stakeholders. It is critical to engage stakeholders at every point in the stage. You are all doing that by being here today. You have all taken this on over the past year, and that will really root your the strategies that you develop into based on the involvement of a number of stakeholders. So in addition to criminal justice stakeholders, you also want to include human service agencies, government financial assistance administrators, individuals from the executive branch, as well as non-criminal justice government agencies, community-based organizations, and people who are directly impacted by incarceration and their families. It's important that this is a very defined structure. So in the US, we have developed task forces that include all of these stakeholders, and they are part of the process from beginning to end. Developing work groups, similar to the breakout groups that you guys have taken on yesterday and today. Having work groups that work together throughout the process. These work groups can develop the policies, can help ensure implementation, and can measure the success of implementation. Work groups can be targeted to unique populations, or they can also focus on different decision points in the system. So I talked about number one. So number two is analyzing data and identifying drivers. So what this gets to is assessing your system, and I know a lot of this work has already been done. But in order to know how a system can reduce its use of incarceration or how conditions of confinement can be improved, it has to be rooted in understanding what's driving the current incarcerated population, identifying what those drivers are. And here are 3 strategies to do so, which is reviewing policies and sentences currently, talking with system actors, people in this room, people who have been in the system, other external stakeholders, as well as analyzing your data. So what you want to identify is what types of people are finding themselves in prison, what types of crimes are your biggest drivers of your prison population, so with your strategies, you know what to target. And I see a lot of that work has already been done in the proposal. You also want to add qualitative factors. Senor Bergman's presentation yesterday talked a lot about qualitative factors, doing surveys and focus groups and interviews with people who are in the system, people who work in the system, as well as external stakeholders to identify what the system currently looks like so you know what you're changing. So this is a very busy slide. What essentially this shows is what you could identify through this process. This could be an end result of the process. So let me tell you what I mean by that. This is an example of the drivers of incarceration in the United States. So if you look at the left circle, it's divided into state prisons, local jails, and federal prisons. What you see in the green state prisons are, of the people in prison, how many went in for public order, for burglary, for assault, murder, robbery, drugs, and then other. So what it does is the analysis will identify what crimes people are going into prison for and what are the biggest drivers of that entry. It also does the same thing for local jails and federal prisons. So this gives you targets of what to address if you really want to reduce your prison population. So another component of the assessment, as I said, is identifying key decision points. So what are all the points along the way from the arrest all the way through to the end where someone is making a decision if this person should go into prison or if they should be held in the community. And then once you identify the decision points, there can be different strategies for each decision point to reduce that use of incarceration. Another slide that will probably make your head spin, but I'll explain it. This is an example of a system map. This is an example of the U.S. identifying all of the decision points that we have in our system. So for example, at arrest, that's the first time there's a decision. Do I bring this person in or do I give them a citation and let them go? That's the first point where a decision is made if someone is going to be incarcerated or not. Then the decision is about the charge. Then if they will be held pre-trial or if they will be released. Arraignment is another point. Bail review, we have monetary bail system in the U.S. If you're interested in learning more, I recommend you don't learn more, but I'm happy to explain it after the presentation. Then trial or pre-negotiation, and then disposition of sentence. So these are all the different decision points along our system map. So in the next slides, I have a slide for each of the decision point with strategies of how to reduce the use of incarceration at each decision point. For sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to highlight a few, but I included them in here so if people are interested in getting a copy of the presentation afterward, you have that information even though there's not time to go over everything. So the first decision point is arrest. So some of the strategies that have been implemented in the US to reduce the number of people being sent into incarceration at the point of arrest. Some are book and release, which is you book them in to the jail system to have that on record, and then you immediately release them back into the community. There's also citations in lieu of arrest. There's also pre-booking diversion. I'll get into a little bit of that later, but this is essentially just because the police are called for an incident does not mean that person needs to be arrested and brought into the system. Maybe they need to be connected to services. Maybe they need a mental health person to de-escalate the situation. So diverting someone even before the arrest in the first police interaction completely outside of the criminal justice system. Next is the charge. Again, I'm not going to go through each of these, but just to give you a sense, for each decision point, there are strategies that can be implemented to slow that flow into incarceration. There are strategies for pre-trial release. One of the strategies that are being used in the United States is risk-based release decision-making. So what this means is there are actuarial risk assessment tools that determine the risk of two things at the pretrial phase. It determines the risk that someone won't show up to court, and it determines the risk that someone will commit another crime if they're released. Based on the results of this risk assessment, that is used by the judge to make a decision if someone needs to be held in detention awaiting trial or if they need to be released. It's important that the assumption is released to the community unless the risk assessment is high enough that it shows that that would be too risky and they might need to be held pre-trial. The next decision point is around case processing. Some people in the United States sit in jail for much longer than they should pre-trial because the case takes so long to be processed. So there are a number of strategies to shorten that case processing time so people who do need to be housed pre-trial can be there for as short of a time as possible. Some of the strategies up here are strictly enforcing time limits, establishing backlog courts that are targeted at the people who are backlogged, who have been in the system for a long time, as well as consolidating cases if an individual has multiple criminal cases. Decision point 5 is disposition and sentence. I'm going to dive into a few of these. You have a number of them up here. The two I'm going to dive into are reducing sentence lengths and reducing who is sentenced into prison to begin with. So this is an example of sentencing practices in Germany. I know it's a little small to see and it's in English, so I will translate. So this is the makeup of all the sentences in Germany. So what this shows on the bottom, so the bottom half in gray, so half of their criminal cases are diverted. The bottom larger gray section is diversion by the prosecutor themselves divert, and then the other gray line is diversion by the judge. So they are completely diverted out of the justice system. The other largest sanction for a criminal conviction are fines, which you see in yellow. Fines are used a lot in Germany. And one of the strategies they use for fines is called a day fine system. What the day fine system means is the amount you pay per day is based on your ability to pay. I don't know if you all have this problem, but in the United States, we have a problem of over-fining people to the point where there's no chance they'll ever be able to pay it. And so it doesn't have an impact and the money is not being paid. So in Germany, they've taken the approach to incorporate the ability to pay. So your day fine is your ability to pay, and then the seriousness of the offense determines how many days you pay that fine. So it takes into account seriousness of offense and ability to pay. The last section up above, the blue and the green, are the prison sentences. But as you can see in the green, more than half of their prison sentences are suspended. The person actually doesn't ever serve that prison sentence. It is a suspended sentence. And only that top blue section are the people that actually serve prison sentences. So this is an example of what a sentencing structure could look like. In Germany, they have, I've heard reports between 65 and 75 per 100,000 people are incarcerated. That is one of the lowest incarceration rates in Europe. And this is one of the ways they've been able to achieve it by having all of these alternative sentence options. Now we'll get into the length of the sentence for people who do wind up going into prison. This is an example of the Dutch system, their prison sentences. So over to the left are the percent that are 1 month or less. The second bar are 3 months or less. The third bar is 6 months or less. The fourth bar, you'll see 91%, is 1 year or less. The 95% is 2 years or less. 98% is 4 years or less. So this shows that 83% of their prison sentences are for a year or less. All the way over to the right, you'll see only 1% of their prison sentences are for 4 years or more. I won't depress you and overlay this with the prison sentence lengths in the United States. Let's just say they'd be through the ceiling. So decision point number 6 is post-conviction and supervision. You see a number of strategies here. I'm going to highlight 2 of them. Okay. So the first one I'm going to highlight is under the community supervision and support. The first bullet, the first sub-bullet, which is risk and needs-based supervision. I know you all have a system of probation. It's important that probation supervision is rooted in a risk and needs-based assessment. What that means is the risk is how high or low someone is at risk of committing another crime. If you'll notice, risk at this point is different than risk at pretrial. Risk at pretrial was risk of committing another crime and risk of not showing up for court. Now you're past the court phase, so that second risk factor isn't important anymore. So it's looking at the risk that someone will commit another crime, and then the needs are their criminogenic factors that lead to their risk level, but that are changeable, right? So static versus dynamic risk factors. So this includes static risk factors, which are things that can't change. So seriousness of offense, the age at which you committed your first crime. These are examples of static factors. Dynamic factors are things that can change, such as your job situation and how much you value your employment, such as antisocial peers. Those are things that are dynamic factors that can change, and those dynamic factors are the needs that you want to target and address with programming and treatment. One important thing to note is what's called the risk, need, and responsivity principle. What this means is you want to target your services on your high-risk population. That's where you'll get the biggest bang for your buck, the biggest return on investment. So the people who are identified as high risk, you want to target your resources to them. And I'll show that people who are low risk, you actually don't want to target much services to them at all. You can actually increase their risk by doing so. And I'll explain that on the next slide. Then the need, again, is addressing the dynamic factors like antisocial attitudes, beliefs, values, antisocial peers. And then lastly, responsivity is taking into account how people learn and maximizing their ability to acquire new attitudes and skills. So I want to show you what I mean by this risk and need overlay. So these are the results of the largest study of community-based correctional treatment facilities. They tracked a little over 13,000 offenders who were placed in one of the 38 halfway houses and community-based corrections facilities. This is an example of what happens when you intervene with low-risk offenders. What the graph shows is the either reduction or increase in the recidivism rate. So what you see here is when you target low-risk offenders, about 2/3 of the programs that targeted low-risk offenders, they actually increased the person's recidivism rate. They actually, let me say that again, they increased their chance of committing another crime. They increased their chance of going into prison by throwing services at them. On the flip side, when you target high-risk offenders, you see a flip in the results. About 2/3 of the programs that targeted high-risk offenders actually decreased the recidivism rate versus increase the recidivism rate. The reason this is, when you target too many services at low-risk offenders, you're throwing them in with people who have antisocial behavior. These are people who already have prosocial behavior, which is one of the reasons why they are considered low risk. By throwing too many services at them with high-risk people, they will learn antisocial behavior from those higher risk people. You also disrupt prosocial networks. So if the person is low risk because they have a good job, they have good community connections, they're involved in the community, the more time that they're spending on the treatment and services you're trying to throw at them, the less time they have to do those other things, and it disrupts those positive parts of their life that are contributing to their low risk. Another point I want to talk about is, and decision point number 6 is the second one, which is intermediate responses to technical violations. I don't know how it is in Costa Rica, but in the United States, we found a large driver of our prison population are people who were put on probation, fail probation, and so we send them to prison. One of the things we learned is there's a high percentage of those people, they didn't commit another crime, they just violated the rules of probation, which we would call technical violations. So a large percentage of people are being sent to prison not for a new crime, but because they violated a rule. They didn't show up for a probation appointment. They weren't able to get a job, and that was part of their probation plan. So what we've implemented and what research shows is more effective is having community-based responses for those technical violations. You still need to have accountability so they adhere to probation, but the responses should be rooted in the community, and the response for technical violations should never be sending someone to prison. Lastly, you should include responses to both positive and negative behavior. One of the things research shows is called the 4-in-1 model. You should give 4 responses to positive behavior for every 1 response to negative behavior. It is the most effective way to change behavior. I know we in the criminal justice system tend to focus on responding to negative behavior, but responding to positive behavior that you see, thank you for showing up for your probation appointment. I see you got a job, that's wonderful. Giving positive, even just verbal reinforcement, you'd be surprised how much that really impacts getting the behavior that you want on the people who are on probation. The last thing I'll say on this point, it's imperative that probation is not an intermediate step to prison, that it does not become this net widening where people go on probation, most are unsuccessful, and then they wind up in prison. And so it's just a step on the way to prison. It should truly be used as an alternative to incarceration, and everything should be managed at the community level. Lastly, on this point, community treatment capacity. No one should ever go to prison to get treatment, to get services. We have that challenge in the United States where sometimes there's good treatment in prison and not in the community. So you'll see judges actually sentence someone to prison to get that treatment. Prison should be saved for people who cannot safely be housed in the community. So the goal, it's not on here. I'm missing a slide, that's okay. So the goal is population needs should equal community capacity. And when that is achieved, then you're able to ensure that no one is sent to prison for treatment and services. What you do is you use your risk assessment, risk and need assessment, to identify those population needs. And then you can do an assessment of services available in the community, overlay them with the needs of the population, and see how they match up. Is your community capacity equaling the needs of the population? Are you providing a little bit too much services in an area where there's not a lot of need? Are you under providing services in areas where there's a lot of need? There's actually a tool from George Mason University's ACE Center of Excellence that does just this. It helps jurisdictions do this overlay to assess their community capacity and where investment needs to be made and where divestment might need to be made in order to assure, again, population needs and community capacity are equal. I think I have about 10 minutes left, is that right? Okay. No one's saying anything, so I just might keep going for a while. No, I'm kidding. I'll try to keep the rest to 10 minutes. So next is focusing on unique populations. So once you conduct the assessment and you know who's going into your prison system and why, That assessment can be used to develop targeted approaches for unique populations. I know you all will be talking about vulnerable populations this afternoon, so it's great to see that some of this work has already been done. And this will help what I call unpack the population. The first point of unpacking the population is identifying what groups of people just don't belong in the system. In the US, we use the criminal justice system to address the majority of people with mental health needs, to address the majority of people with substance abuse needs. And the criminal justice system, research shows, is not the best place to address those needs. And I know in the US, our prison officials will be the first people to say, these people do not belong with me. They do not belong in my institutions. So I want to highlight the importance of understanding racial and ethnic disparities. And I was actually very delighted to see that one of the top principles in the proposal is focusing on diversity. In the US, people who are Black, who are Hispanic, in communities where there's a lot of American Indians or indigenous populations, they are overrepresented in prison. There are more of them in prison than make up the population in the community. It's important to know what those disparities are, so you can measure that over time and as you implement solutions to see if you're addressing that disparity. Also important to focus on people with serious mental illness. So what this slide shows, and it divides it out between men and women, because this is actually a little different for men and women. So in the United States for men, 3.2% of the US population has a mental illness, a serious mental illness, but 14.5% of men in prison have a serious mental illness. This is exacerbated when you look at women. So in the community, 4.9% of women have a serious mental illness, but 31% of women in prison have a serious mental illness. So we are over-incarcerating people with serious mental illness. I could probably give a whole nother presentation on what has led to this in the United States. The most important takeaway I would say for this population, and I know it's not this simple, get them out of the criminal justice system. The mental health system is the appropriate system to manage them. I remember when I went and visited the system in Germany, and we asked them if we could visit their facility that handled people with mental illness. And they kind of looked at me with like a question on their face, because they don't have people with serious mental illness in their prisons. They're dealt with and managed in the mental health system. And lastly, community treatment should always be a priority for this population. And I would say everything I just said about mental health also applies to people with substance abuse disorders. A public health approach is what is needed for these populations, not a criminal justice response. So focus on women. I'm going to do this quickly. So women tend to have different pathways to prison. The makeup of the types of crimes that get them into prison and the underlying situation behind them are different for women. So research shows it's important to do a separate analysis for women so you know what to target. So example here, what this shows in the United States, 32% of women incarcerated are incarcerated for property offenses, 29% for drug offenses, and 21% for public order offenses. Another important point about women is the prevalence of victimization. I want to make 2 points to this. One point I want to say is there are high rates of a history of victimization among women. Over to the right, you'll see 86% of women in the US prisons have experienced sexual violence. 77% have experienced partner violence. And 60% have experienced caregiver violence. I do want to make a point here to say, while the prevalence of victimization is very high with women, and it's always a topic of conversation with women, it's important that we recognize this is not solely for women. Men in the criminal justice system have high rates of victimization. In the United States, the highest percentage of people who go into prisons are Black men. They are also the most likely to be victims of crime. So for both women and men, we have to understand the victimization that they've experienced, and we have to have a trauma-informed approach for both populations. I highlight it for women because the rates tend to be on the higher side. Lastly, and I know this was spoken about a few times, is the impact of families when a woman is incarcerated. In the US, nearly 80% of women in jails are mothers. So the impact of the family on when a woman is incarcerated has major impacts. Not only impacts for the family, but impacts for the other parts of your system, of your government system. In the US, if the mother is the primary caregiver, she's incarcerated, the children might wind up in the child welfare system. So now you're increasing and exploding the child welfare system. So these things need to be taken into account when making sentencing decisions. There's one state in the United States that does a family impact statement. So anytime a woman is looking at incarceration, they do an assessment of what impact that would have on their family, and that assessment is taken into account at sentencing. The last unique population is youth. There are a whole nother slew of strategies for youth. I'll highlight two. School-based diversion, which means working with schools to identify other solutions when they're having a problematic person and not calling the police. Then there's police diversion, which is setting up screening, assessment, and resource centers. This provides another place for the police to bring youth instead of bringing them into booking. They can bring them to these centers. They are screened and assessed for what their needs are, and then connected with resources in the community. Okay, a few more minutes on conditions of confinement and reentry. I could spend a whole nother hour presentation on this. I will not. Few components I want to talk about. In Germany, they have the normalization and reintegration principle. This is rooted in the idea that being sent to prison is in and of itself the punishment. Being taken out of the community, away from your family, away from your community, away from your friends, is the punishment. And so life within the facility should look just as similar to life in the community as possible. And this helps ensure successful reintegration back into the community. The more we institutionalize our institutions, the harder it is for people to reintegrate back into the community, and the higher your incarceration rates will be. These are pictures of some of the prison rooms in Germany. Reentry starts at day one. I'm going to talk about risk and need again. So on day one, when the person is brought into an institution, research shows that you should be planning for reentry on that day, conducting an assessment of what their needs are, and then providing programming and services in the institutions to address those needs. I saw a lot of this at the facility I went to yesterday, which was great to see, and I thank the individuals who made sure I was able to go over and see the new facilities, the importance on education and vocational programming. One research study shows that the impact of educational and vocational programming on recidivism. About 61% of people released in California, so this was a study done in California, 61% of the people released returned to prison within 3 years. But if you look at people who participated in education programs during incarceration, that recidivism rate decreased to 43%. I will highlight solitary confinement because this is something that we use a lot in the US, and it's actually the project that I run at Vera. This is what Senor Cavallaro was mentioning yesterday, when people are in an environment where they're in their cell for 23 hours a day, they're restrained during movement, they have limited access to other people or congregate activity. Again, this could be another hour presentation. The main takeaway is this is harmful for the people who are incarcerated. It also is harmful for the staff in the institutions. Systems that have reduced their use of solitary confinement, staff report a better working environment in their facilities as a result. Importance of maintaining family connections. I'll talk about this for youth, but it applies for adults as well. We did a study, Vera did a study that found that youth who spend time with their families while incarcerated have less fights in the facilities. They do better in their schooling in facilities. And they generally fare better when parents are actively engaged in school and there's parental involvement. One important point to hit on reentry. I don't know how much of a problem this is in Costa Rica. It's a big problem in the United States. What we call collateral consequences. So once you have been given a felony conviction or once you have been in prison and you're released, we tack on all of these negative responses even after you're in prison. You can't get certain jobs. You can't get certain professional licenses. You can't vote. Access to public housing is limited, on and on and on. Some universities are looking at limiting the participation of people with a criminal conviction. All these collateral consequences just increase the chance that the person is going to commit another crime when they go out. The more you can reduce, if not eliminate, these collateral consequences, you are setting up the people and the community for success. Lastly, I'll just talk about the importance of measuring outcomes. Once you implement the strategies that have been identified, it's important to measure the outcomes of those strategies. You want to celebrate successes, both communicating internally and externally. It's important to get staff in the facilities on board and bought in. It's important for the community to understand how this affects them, the positive results of these changes. And then where you're not seeing the results you want, make adjustments to what you are implementing. Lastly, I want to leave you with this. It's important to keep in mind as you go through this process that when it comes to incarceration and the system at large, at Vera, we feel there's a need to place human dignity at the philosophical and operational core of incarceration. The goal should be that prisons do not harm, operate on the basis that the loss of liberty itself is the punishment, is grounded in transparency, where practices are informed by evidence-based research, are safe for the incarcerated and staff, at every step default to the least restrictive interventions, provide meaningful programming, and provide meaningful programming. With this conference and the work you've been doing over the past year, you're really taking the steps to make these goals achievable, and I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of your process.
Bien, muchas gracias a Sara por su ponencia. Antes de continuar, nada más quiero presentarles a las personas que quizás vinieron hoy y no estuvieron ayer un video que explica y que resume cuál ha sido el trabajo en relación con la política penitenciaria.
enero del 2017, el Ministerio de Justicia y Paz inició un proceso de elaboración de la primera política penitenciaria en Costa Rica. La ministra, Cecilia Sánchez, articuló un equipo coordinador para el diseño e implementación, con funcionarios del Ministerio de Justicia y Paz, el ILANUD y el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. En marzo del 2017 se dio por inaugurado el proceso, con la primera conferencia en el Colegio de Abogados y Abogadas, donde también se presentó una propuesta inicial a cargo de 2 expertos. A partir de mayo y durante 6 meses comenzó un plan de trabajo para involucrar a diversos sectores en un proceso de consulta con 10 mesas de trabajo. Esas mesas involucraron a funcionarios del Ministerio de Justicia y Paz, población privada de libertad, el Poder Judicial, la Defensoría de los Habitantes, el Instituto Costarricense sobre Drogas, el Ministerio de Seguridad Pública, diputados, la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas contra la Droga y el Delito y expertos internacionales en sistemas penitenciarios de Finlandia, Escocia, Estados Unidos y Uruguay. En total han participado unas 150 personas. Los últimos 2 encuentros se realizaron en la sede de la Universidad Nacional en Liberia y en la Escuela de Capacitación Penitenciaria. De todo este proceso se concluyó un texto base para ser validado por todas las partes consultadas. La política abarca temas como el trabajo, educación, inclusión cultural, inserción social, salud integral, infraestructura y mobiliario, atención técnica, seguridad, agrupación vincular diferenciada, respeto a los derechos humanos y el enfoque de género. Confiamos en que esta será una herramienta invaluable para el mejoramiento del sistema penitenciario.
Bueno, y al trabajo ahora seguiría con las mesas. Al inicio ustedes le repartieron una carpeta con un número para cada uno. Ese número representa el grupo al cual va a estar usted trabajando de aquí a la hora del almuerzo. Entonces, un poco reiterando la distribución de ayer, el grupo 1 sobre el tema trabajo y educación. Yolanda está por ahí está Yolanda. Yolanda Badilla va a estar con el grupo 1 entonces, el grupo 2 sobre inserción social y cultural con Sarita Villegas, que está aquí al frente, el grupo 3 de infraestructura con Víctor Cano, allá atrás, el grupo 4 de salud integral con Cristina González, también está allá atrás, el grupo 5 de prevención de la violencia va a trabajar con Luis Carlos Ortiz, allá al fondo del auditorio, y el grupo 6 con Álvaro Sánchez, con el tema atención a poblaciones vulnerables. Entonces, de aquí creo que a las 12:30 van a estar trabajando en las mesas, en las aulas se encuentran a un costado del colegio, siguiendo las flechas verdes que van a encontrar ahí por el camino, y de 12:30, 1 hora de almuerzo, y al regreso siguen en las aulas por un lapso de 1 hora, y aproximadamente a las 2:30 estaríamos aquí en el auditorio para la clausura de este congreso. Entonces pueden trasladarse a sus mesas de trabajo y los aparatitos, los audífonos hay que entregarlos al final del auditorio, y hay una pulsera de una marca que alguien dejó por ahí perdida también. Entonces si alguien la quiere reclamar, diga la marca y todo lo que tiene.
De parte del Colegio de Abogados, recuerden que el auditorio queda cerrado, se abrirá 30 minutos antes de la hora indicada, para que por favor puedan retirar sus pertenencias.